Welcome to Agility. I'm your host, John Coleman. Hi everyone, I'm here with Kyle Richardson, Carolyn Mumby, and Dave Nixon today. How are you all doing, guys?
Very well, thank you.
Good, thank you, John. Nice to be here.
Lovely to be here as well. And the question we're going to talk about today is why organizations need to widen the scope of Agile and where and how to start. Just to get the ball rolling, in the previous episode, we talked about what is Agile, what is agility, and just to kind of set the scene, because if we're talking about why organizations need to widen the scope of Agile, what does that even mean, right? So just to broaden the scope a little bit, what I wrote earlier this week was that organizational agility is about creating an adaptable organization with a higher possibility to drive disruption that could be in society, the industry, or the marketplace. And it's manifested through more effectiveness in optimizing current value, getting value for the products you already have, services you already have, and capturing unrealized value, maybe products, customers, services you haven't discovered yet, with more frequency of impact, more quality, more learning, less drag, more flow, more efficiency, and more work sustainability. It looks like cognitively diverse people collaboration. We don't really mind how that's done. It could be through holacracy or agile or lean agile, product management, the 3 ways of DevOps, or even just following values or principles from some manifesto like the Agile Manifesto, Agile People Manifesto, Modern Agile, and so on. But what it feels like is more humanity, more authenticity, more leadership, more engagement, and more consideration, not just for current revenues, but also future revenues.
Hi, John. Thanks for inviting me. I'm CEO of Elidex, and I have been leading the Innovate UK-backed Shine project as a collaboration platform, which we've been developing over the past 5 months. That's been really interesting. So although my background is in employment law and also in HR, I've now evolved and emerged, as many people have during the COVID crisis, into another part of my life, which is now focusing on enabling collaboration for people who want to solve or need to solve complex problems.
Okay, so I'm Kyle Richardson. I guess I'm your traditional software manager type, but less traditionally, I have no idea how I got here. And most of the time, I confess I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm way more interested in people, how to help them become better at whatever it is they want to become better at.
My name's David Nixon. I run a business called Creative Edge, which is all about narrative. My background is in health and social care, creative writing and performing, and the common denominator is narrative and stories. And I use these to help people, to help solve problems, and to kind of make up my life as I go along as well.
So Kyle, Carolyn, and Dave, this question, why organizations need to widen the scope of Agile and where and how to start?
I think that one of the problems here is the sort of, where do we start? As you say, where do we start? And viewing everything as being potentially something that you can use Agile for, which in my experience is definitely not the case. So what I like to do is I use the Cynefin model or framework because it's helpful to, especially when I'm working with other people, to help them start the process and say, okay, well, if you look at Dave Snowden's framework, you can identify very quickly where you're going to use best practice and good practice. You're not going to need Agile there, and they're more linear. You look at the model, the framework, it's easy to find that on the internet, obviously, to start with that. And then when you do find that you're into a complex situation where you need to probe, sense, respond, you've got emergent practice happening. That's, to me, where the Agile is absolutely perfect. And it works so brilliantly well. So I don't know if Kyle and Dave agree with that, but that's where I would like to start with it in terms of blank sheet of paper. How do we recognize an Agile potential?
I'd probably be inclined to say maybe there's a tiny bit of disagreement on my part. I mean, I definitely don't think we need to fold an Agile process around everything we do, but I do think that Agile in terms of the Agile manifesto, Agile in terms of Agile as a philosophy, can be applied across any business and probably in any segment of any business if we put our minds to it, and can deliver value. So yeah, but I do agree with what you're saying about the areas and the pain points maybe where agility stands out.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Cynefin model, and I love the 5 domains there. The obvious, simple, clear domain where you just follow a recipe and just do something. You don't need any project management method, just go off and do something. And then the complicated domain where it's like the domain of experts, really, where you kind of know what you don't know kind of thing, and you either spend more time figuring out what to do, or you hire the people who have the knowledge and you get the experts together and they can work away. And that's kind of the home for like self-managing teams, really. And then the complex domain is kind of the home for unknown unknowns, where you kind of don't really know where to start, but you got the right people together. But you don't just rely on experts, you also rely on a bit of fresh thinking as well. Often maybe the experts get stuck in analysis paralysis. And so having some people from a different school of thought can actually be really, really useful. And as Carolyn was saying, a lot of Agile is kind of in that space. A lot of Agile is actually in the complicated space as well, because that's the home of self-managing teams. But in the complex space, the more you get into it, sometimes in Scrum, for example, I've got this thing called a product backlog, which it could be deeply complex. You mightn't even know what product you're building. You might even know who the customer is. So you might have to do loads of experiments. You might even go into the what I call the positive chaos, where you kind of relax the constraints for a while, put people in an incubator, give them a time constraint, and they kind of knock themselves out. And I agree, Kyle, as well with you, is that actually one of the things you get out of the Cynefin is that it's kind of telling us that depending on which domain you're in, you kind of act differently. The disorder domain in the middle is like what I often refer to as the WTF domain. I don't mean waterfall when I say that. Where do we go? What do we do? But you could just tell people what to do for a bad chaos, or you trust the teams or whatever. But I love Cynefin because it kind of explains that when you're in the complex domain, you probably shouldn't be using Gantt charts. You might need people adapting to kind of. So yeah, it's really useful from that point of view. And adding to Kyle's point about can you use Agile? I'm using Agile in non-tech for the last 3 years, and I've had some interesting results with it. But I did have to think a little bit differently to what I would have done previously in software development, for example, and not quite the same, but more or less the same approaches will work.
Well, I heard you say the words chaos. Sorry, Kyle, I heard you say chaos, and I know that I think of Dave as he's self-declared chaos engineer, so I didn't know if he had something to add there, which might be of interest, I'm sure.
Yeah, I like chaos. But I think it's a misunderstood thing, isn't it? I mean, chaos, people think of chaos as just, it's chaos. So it has that adjectival element to it. But really it's just an unquantifiable set of complex systems all interacting in a way that it's impossible to fully understand. From my perspective as a narrative person, what I look for is, what's emerging from that. What are the patterns, applying sort of, pattern recognition? What are the patterns that are emerging from that chaos? And this is kind of how we do a lot of our work. We look for what's emerging, and that becomes a narrative. We then compare that to what is known. If there's similarities to what is known, then we can kind of say, okay, it looks a little bit like that. And this is kind of how humans make sense of the world, because we live in chaos every single day, but we don't see it because we have all these social filters in place.
So you can use that, can't you? I mean, you can pick that up and you can run with it. So if you're starting with a blank page, you don't have to have necessarily come to terms with agile before you can start to be agile. And some people are just born with this agility, I find, and then other people have to really try and practice it to get it. But once you've identified an area that you'd like to be agile in, or a problem which you feel agile can help with, then okay, what are you going to do then? What's next? How do you get moving with it? Well, there are lots of different ways you could go about it. I'm currently reading Ed Morrison's book called Strategic Doing, which I'm really enjoying. And, that's about giving people the skills to be able to solve wicked problems, which I like the idea of as well, because there's really life-changing, world-changing problems. Some of them don't have to be, of course. But Ed's founder and director of the Agile Strategy Labs at Purdue University. And because of the work that we're doing with Shine in the Shine project as a collaboration platform, I'm really interested to know more about, once we've done the analysis of understanding when people are collaborating and how they're collaborating, we found, with the help of working with Kyle and his teams, that what they wanted to know was, what now? What next? Okay, that's interesting. You've told me this. You might be right. You might not be right about my level of collaboration in this team. And that might have an impact on my ability to be agile, which obviously we think it has. What next? What now? Which was a very intelligent point to make. We needed to go beyond just observing. We needed to give people conversation starters, maybe, so that they could start to move their actual self-improvement, their performance forward. And that's been a really interesting experiment that we've done with Kyle and his teams. It was a real eye-opener for us about how it didn't matter how good the teams were at Agile, they were really keen to know more. And how can I be better at Agile? How can I be more agile, I suppose? Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up collaboration, Carolyn, because in the complex space from a Kinevin point of view, collaboration is what's really needed. So like if you're just working, you got a few teams working together, they might actually need to collaborate with people outside their team of teams, some other part of the organization.
Yes.
And if you get good collaboration going and some really fresh thinking, it helps you to deal with that. So really, really glad that you're looking into that with Shine and the other services and product offerings that you have.
Just an article that I was reading by some Dutch researchers about narrative reflection as a means to explore team effectiveness, kind of identified that narrative processes, understanding the story, it's not just a way of promoting cohesion, it's a really good way of identifying incongruences as well within teams, because we have layers and layers and layers of these stories that we take part in and tell and express and receive, and they're individual and they're collective and they're social and they're geopolitical. And I think that bringing what I've learned through working with Kyle and Carolyn is that Agile is very much about creating a collective narrative that becomes the vessel for the journey. And by applying sort of plot theory, we can expand that outwards. We all buy into these stories and we all share them in some way or another. Perhaps this is a way that Agile can expand into other areas, by looking for, what's the shared experience?
Yeah.
Where's the intersection between these spheres of shared experience? And those are the points, those are then the entry point.
I think that's where, Dave, like the narrative patterning stuff that, that you've been talking with me about and And Carolyn's point about collaboration measurement tools like Shine and where they lead to next in terms of questions, that's where they fit together with what John's saying, and that's where we need to widen things out, and it's where I'm seeing things go from complicated to complex is much less in, like John, in that traditional software development space where I still live and manage teams. It works really well. It's much more when we bump up against HR systems within larger businesses. Obviously, I'm working within my business, my tech. It's pretty large, like 5,000 people around the world, and where we bump up against HR systems, where we bump up against finance teams. That's where I think expanding that agility concept to enable those teams to fit in, to enable us to have cross-functional teams, to enable the concept, even like bringing forward the Scrum concepts, John, into that wider business world, so that we're bringing together and using tools like narrative patterning, like collaboration measurement tools to maybe keep us on track, tell us where we're going, but really trying to bring agile practices into the wider world so that we can have cross-functional teams that include different people from different business sectors.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing I'd say as well is that when we are reaching out across, I think it's important that we allow people to do whatever type of agility suits them. I so often see a kind of a pill being kind of handed out, take this pill, everything will be fine. This is our standard approach. We got 2,500 people trained on this approach, whether it suits you or not, and you kind of do that kind of thing. And I think we need to be more flexible. It might feel less efficient, but if you really want the change to stick, I think, and you want people to buy into it, I think it needs to suit them. What are your thoughts on that?
So yes, amen.
And the other thing I noticed as well is that, like my current client, I'm a coach in a particular function, and the other coaches are also assigned to a function, and there is something dysfunctional about that. But I don't lose heart. You can't help where you get hired, but what you can do is, if, for example, whatever function you're in, if your teams are kind of going into another function, for example, or going across a few functions as a value stream of work, kind of cutting across a few, I think it's important that we try to link those things up. If people use Kanban boards, for example, that the boards are going across multiple functions so we can see what's going on. We can see what the story is. I think otherwise we're just going to reinforce having very agile individual functions that don't really work well together.
Very thin vertical silos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious, Dave, about the narrative. I'd love to hear a few examples. So when people want to kind of widen the scope of agile and so on, what have you tried so far? Do you have any kind of stories to tell us or any examples to share in terms of what kind of narrative really kind of resonated with people?
At the moment, I'm doing some very interesting work with Carolyn. Kyle is also lending a hand to the development of something that I'm calling narrative patterning, which basically uses 7 basic plots to try and promote alignment within teams, within organizations, and within a marketplace. So by understanding a process as a story, we can kind of play things out in a safe space. And play is the operative word there as well. We can play things out. We can engage in creative and imaginative processes that we're all capable of. Anyone who ever tells me that they're not creative, I see as a challenge to me to sit them down and prove to them that they are, because we're all creative. We're born creative. We just lose access to it over the years. We become jaded and sort of brittle in our thinking. So this is one of the reasons why Agile is a great connection point for what I do, because it's a very kind of supple way of thinking, and it engages with the unknown. It engages with innovation and new ways of doing things, or even old ways of doing things that we've forgotten about. One thing that we're looking at the moment is, and it actually came off the back of the podcast that we did, the kind of Rupert the Bear layout that I mentioned. I'm exploring ways of kind of using that to provide sort of immediate engagement and also depth, and also hitting kind of, multiple preferences for engaging with information as well. So visual and kind of more verbal, some short text, some long text. And as I was creating that, what occurred to me is that this looks very much like a Miro board as well. So this sort of almost sketchbook layout to things, I think, engages with a part of us that loves stories and that loves being told and loves telling stories, where we can kind of make the connections ourselves. When we allow people to make the connections themselves, you get more buy-in. Yeah, people
don't you think
more involved.
Yeah, and don't you think as well that we're being asked, OD, organizational development and culture, people, HR, we're being asked to develop a story, a narrative, and because it's a way of reaching everybody in the organization, so that we can circulate the story, the narrative, and align everybody, and also keep hearing back from people in a way which they find more relatable. So it's quite difficult to say, if you ask somebody a direct question about how they're feeling, I mean, if you just take it down to the most basics about, collaboration, and you say, okay, well, you're not collaborating very well according to this, what are you going to do about it? That's not very helpful. Whereas if in fact you're able to start a conversation and say, well, when we look at the team as a whole, the way in which it's collaborating is a bit patchy. How do you think that might be affecting the story or the organization, the narrative which we're trying to achieve? I mean, I'm working with a client at the moment who has developed a narrative around what you'd expect. It's a very personal narrative to them. That's not the point. But the thing is that they've had to build in their vision, their North Star, their purpose, their why. Everything's had to be built into that narrative. So it becomes quite complex. You've got to sort those things out. I mean, obviously, OKRs can help you with it at the beginning, objectives, but you've got to build everything in. It's all got to flow all the way through. And one of the things that they're using is that what the why is for them is to build everlasting relationships. Now that is so powerful at every level of the organization. I've found personally, looking at it with an HR lens, that I'm able to make that work for me in so many ways and help people to improve, connect, move on, align, using that, because it's not confrontational. It's helpful, supportive, and it's authentic.
Just to add to something you mentioned at the beginning there about conveying the narrative of an organization to the people working within it. I mean, it can run both ways. What is the narrative of the people working within it, individually and collectively? How does that align with the organization? So we can make top and bottom adjustments. The river metaphor, the river is everywhere at once. It's in the mountains, it's at the sea, it's in the middle.
I love the Cower model, which you shared with me. I came to the Cower model through Dave, and I found it to be really, really helpful. The idea that you have this river metaphor, everybody seems to be able to relate to it. And it is a way of, it's culturally neutral, which again, for global organizations is very important.
We describe it as culturally responsive.
Culturally neutral, I said. Yes, it is. It has to be neutral before it can be responsive, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, a river, everyone knows what a river is. Everyone understands.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the language of metaphor, isn't it? Which is such a powerful device within creating narratives.
So Dave, I'm curious, those narratives, what would they look like? Is it like a comic sketchbook? Is it a video? Is it a more piece of communication text?
Well, that's the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the narrative is, wow, that's a really good question. Because I think the narrative is what exists between individuals, between entities, processes that take place. And we tell stories to express these narratives.
Well, yeah, because, Dave, we were just speaking to somebody yesterday, a colleague that we've met through networking, and we'd introduced the David Marquette video, Turning the Ship Around, with him, which of course we're all familiar with, very powerful. And I think that's shown on one of the whiteboard doodle type media, and it's only about a 6-minute video. It's very, very powerful, very quick, but you could do a lot with that narrative, because I mean, you can make it shorthand, you could do it into cartoons as well, like, you know, use small parts of it in your promotions or in your workshops, and then you can use the medium size, and you can extend it and for bigger stories and more in-depth work. And I suggested to this colleague that maybe for his own version, because he was so taken with the turn the ship around idea, that maybe he should get somebody in to do their own version of the whiteboard doodle. And he has done. He told us yesterday that he's actually done that, and that they're so thrilled with it. So, you know, it's open to everybody, isn't it, to see it as you wish to see it.
Well, you've just inspired me to provide some clarity on John's question there, Carolyn. Let's put it that way.
Good.
If you think of the narrative as a mass of connected threads and nodes, if you like, each with their own meaning, each with their own meta attached, and you can pick one of those nodes and pull it up, and it will bring with it a mass of other stories and characters and actions and behaviors. And we can explore that narrative by being precise about which of those nodes or which of those threads you're selecting. And I think this is where it has use on an organizational scale, is you can kind of zoom in and out, and you can zoom right into something, get right down to the granular, but that small piece of information or that character or that behavior or whatever is attached to a much larger narrative, and you can track that because the whole thing's connected. It's a mesh of various phenomena.
Just getting back to the turn the ship around video as well, that really resonates with me as well, because you've got Daniel Pink with Drive, for example. He had a cartoon doodly video as well, and Henrik Nieberg with the agile, was the product owner in a nutshell. I think it's been watched like over 10 million times or something like that. I think same with Drive. So actually, you just reminded me the power of doodle videos and telling stories in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Probably the most powerful communication approach I've seen, actually.
Blowing paint on a cave wall across your hands. This is what I mean, the old ideas, maybe.
And speaking of nodes, I mean, Elon Musk has just rebranded his job title as Chief of Tech Nodes. So obviously nodes are extremely powerful, as we can see, the most powerful brains in the world.
Well,
relying on nodes.
I had a real realization earlier on, actually, just as I was preparing for this, that we contain within us nodes of other people's stories, plus the thread of our own. We're in that sort of like, in a kind of quantum way, we are both nodal and threadial at the same time. Until
we are continuums.
We are continuums, yes, and particles within the continuums of others.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if we could see the organization like that, more readily see the organization like that, and maybe narratives can help us to do that? Because if you've got that, you know, if you're back to the question why organizations, or not the question, but the statement, why organizations need to widen the scope of agile, and then the posited question where and how to start, if you are seeing them as the hierarchical approach, if you're still stuck in that routine of hierarchy, I think it's going to be very difficult to really make agile flow through your organization. It's going to be tough, isn't it, Kyle?
Yeah, it is. Having just recently had to create some kind of organizational chart for a few hundred people, I can tell you I have had to fit in with an HR process that demands that kind of that visual that makes you feel like people are in narrow boxes and they find it hard to step out. But I've augmented that with actually presenting a view to the whole organization that's more biological. So a model where cross-functional teams are effectively behaving as cells and individuals. And this speaks, John, to your idea of like, how do we get across these verticals? Individuals are free to break off in a kind of an antibody function and drift across and form into and attach themselves to other cells in order to make those cells more functional, more productive, and also to group cells together in a, I'm not even sure what the biology is for that function, but I think you can augment that kind of org chart type way, that hierarchical view of things, and you can ask people to understand that sometimes there's a comfort factor in understanding a point in a hierarchy purely from a knowing you have a single point of truth, maybe. But for most of the functions that you work in your business life, you can actually abandon that and function in a much more biological, free-flowing way.
Well, yeah, and the single point of truth is going to be out of date. That's the problem.
Yes, you need to struggle to make that single point of truth something that's dynamic and keeps going. And there's a lot of, I mean, John might be, with his software background, familiar with the GitLab work on this. They've tried really hard to establish, like, and Carolyn, you'd like this from an HR perspective. Their sort of company handbook is an evolving, they have a handbook first approach. And everyone in the company can edit it. Everyone in the company can augment it. And it's not the handbook that they made before. It's the handbook they have right now today, and it's always evolving. It's a pretty cool way to think about it.
Well, I'm a really big fan of that, because if you give the people, I know this is agile and this is basic stuff for agilists, but it isn't necessarily for HR a natural starting point. But if you give the problem to the people closest to it, they will give you the answers you need. And actually, when you take that into an HR environment, everybody's happy usually with the outcome, because peer pressure is one of those things where, although your first thought is, yes, I'm going to change this handbook so that we never come to work, you then realize that you never get paid either. So before you start, all right, okay, the trade-offs, but you're there doing that and solving that problem together. And I remember many years ago in a pharma situation where they had a problem with non-prescription drugs in the organization on the sort of on the factory floor, if you like, and there was a problem, and they needed, I mean, I'm going back 20 years, and they needed to somehow solve this problem, and they thought that it'd be a really great idea if they bought a policy and looked to us and said, oh, could you write a policy so we can write a policy, but it doesn't make any difference. Wouldn't it be better to give that to a group of people within your organization who have to work on that factory floor with the people who are actually taking the drugs that they don't want them to be taking, because it's obviously going to be affecting their lives. And before you knew where they were, they'd had this new policy put in place. It worked really well. The peer pressure made sure it happened and was implemented. And it was only a few, maybe 3 or 4, 5, 6 individuals that were causing the problem, and they drifted out the organization, and the vast majority of people remained, happy at work. What could be better?
There's a great book called Coaching Agile Teams by Lisa Adkins. Mm. And the line from it that just never leaves my head, it's like it's burnt into my brain, is take it to the team. And that's what she falls back to all the time. Don't try and figure out what the solution is. Take it to the team, because it's the team that are faced with implementing the solution that are the ones that are going to help you figure out how to solve the problem.
Just on that, Kyle, getting back to the original question as well, in terms of where and how do we start, right? So taking back to the team, but if we don't delete some behaviors, leadership level, that becomes difficult, doesn't it? I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a big boss and she says, you will do this by this date, no questions. The commitment's already made to the customer before the teams have even looked at how big this thing is.
Absolutely. That person has to be willing to follow that same mantra. That has to flow all the way down. Like, I know in my own leadership team, what I keep saying is, look, if you guys are crazy enough to act like I'm in a position of power above you just because the org chart says that, then you're inviting me to act in horribly irresponsible ways that I don't want to do. Whereas if you're just willing to see us all as these nodes that are to some extent freely forming and floating, and we all want to achieve good things together, and I want to bring my problems to you and you want to bring your problems to me, I'm voluntarily being disempowered and brought down to just another member of the team. That leadership level needs to be able to think beyond themselves and be willing to give up that feeling of power to some extent, that behavior.
There's another element, isn't there, with your position on the org chart, which is accountability and responsibilities. There are fixed points. I think that it's very easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of very postmodern sort of view of the world. Everything is something that can be deconstructed and reformed in a way that's more sort of pleasing to us in some way, but that's not necessarily the case. There will always be fixed points, and perhaps these are the points, a little bit like coral growing on an old wreck.
Yeah.
You know, perhaps these are the anchor points.
The anchor points, yeah.
To actually expand ideas from. You know, there's a great book called The Social Construction of What by a Canadian philosopher of mathematics called Ian Hacking, and he kind of, what he's basically saying is, you know, whoa, hang on a minute, let's not deconstruct ourselves out of existence. There are certain things that are concrete, and in a similar way within plot theory, there are fixed points within the 7 basic plots. We always have a hero of some sorts, and we always need a champion for bringing in new ideas into an organization.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The hero can be the organization.
What if you want to play that out on a global? It depends on scale, doesn't it? It could be the monster.
Yeah. Because one of the things,
I think you have to have heroes at various levels, probably, Dave, and I think as well that accountability. That's the part that the leadership definitely signs up to. They have to be willing to trust enough to give away a lot of that command and control, but they absolutely have to be accountable for what happens and what their teams produce.
I think I prefer the word champion, but I'm not even sure if it's the right word to hero, because one of the things that I look for as leaders are getting more comfortable with agility is that they stop believing in superstars. If only I had Carolyn on my team, everything would be great. And
if you had Carolyn on your team, it would be.
I'm sure it would be. You know what I mean? But there's only so many Carolyns. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's only one. And so very interesting. One of my colleagues told me recently that they noticed a pattern, that the people who were the teams of the superstars were not doing as well as the teams with the so-called ordinary Joe Soaps, Mary Blogs, or whatever. Really, really interesting. The team performance was sometimes, if the ego is a bit too strong, I guess it depends what we mean by hero, right? Because we do want to be inspired, don't we? We do want people to inspire us, and we want to inspire ourselves. It's kind of an interesting area, isn't it? The whole idea of.
Well, we never hear about the heroes that die in Act 1, do we?
That's true.
I bet there's a lot more of them.
Yeah, I hope there are. Yeah, I hope there are. Yeah. So yeah, we have to be careful, I suppose, with black and white thinking. All right, don't we? Because
Yeah, that's right, John. And I think if we feel that leadership is broken to some extent and hierarchical models are outdated and outmoded, then maybe as well we're being binary about hero and monster, and maybe we need to be more layered about that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's layers to everything, though, isn't there? I mean, the monster character or the anti-hero character, the one you love the most is always the one that there's that little bit of good in them. There's that little bit in them, that little light shining in the darkness. And the hero that you love the most is always the one who is he's a shining light. He's noble in every regard, but secretly he's just quite mean to some one person, or he can't quite get past his angst with his cat. Yeah.
The thing is, though, that the stories that I'm experiencing in discussion with Dave and yourself is that they're quite, in terms of needing to use them to convey the story of the organization and the people within it and the mission and the vision and the North Star and all this, they're quite simplistic. We haven't got the opportunity at this stage to make them into richer characters, because how long are we going to keep this going? I mean, you've got to encourage everybody within the organization to feel that the story is accessible without them actually giving over their lives to reading it like a book. So I guess our characters are a bit black and white.
Wouldn't that be amazing if an organization could create a narrative to promote the agile principles, or for whatever reason they create this narrative, and then and then it grows and it becomes a story, and then
Yeah.
they make a film out of it, and then there's
Yeah.
wouldn't that be amazing if that would be?
I'm with you, Dave. I'm with you.
Yeah. So
Let's get
team
on with
members
that.
could add their own. Yeah, teams could add their own parts of the story. That would be brilliant. Taking up
that's
your
me there
point
being
earlier,
quoted
Kyle.
by Christian Slater or whatever, or
Yeah.
show my age,
Yeah.
aren't I?
When can we spin off of the production company, Dave? I'm in.
Well, it's on a post-it note, so I guess that's
That's a start.
That's it. That's sprint done.
John, can we spin a Kanban board around this to just get moving?
God, yeah, I think we
Yeah.
need
As long as it's made out of reclaimed timber, I don't mind.
Less backlogs.
So just to kind of getting back to the question, right? So why organizations need to widen the scope of Agile and where and how to start, right? In terms of, we had a nice discussion there about, black and white thinking and maybe things that we need to delete. But there's one thing that I think is really, really important. And when I see it can be a blocker. It's when there's complacency about the need to improve that it doesn't matter which approach they use, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, UX, whatever, but they put something in and we're done now, we're Agile, boom. And we don't need to improve, we got a Scrum Master, we're all good, happy days. I don't know, I've actually seen teams put something in and then they did have some kind of an improvement, all right, an immediate one, but that improvement goes straight to the bottom line and then the company is expecting more, so. But I'm not even talking about the company expecting more. It's just the whole attitude to learning and not being satisfied that good enough. I mean, sometimes good enough is good enough, but the need for improvement, continual improvement, I think is key really for agility, isn't it?
Well, you're getting into rewards now, aren't you, to some extent there, I think.
Could be,
John.
yeah.
It makes me feel about that. And I don't know, this is a very thorny problem, but I guess if you've got theories around how to motivate people to continue championing the growth of and improvement of the organization, then they need to have their mindset open to any kind of improvement. It's not just about carrying forward with being agile or whatever, they might have been given as a mandate of some sort or tools to do things with. But how do we get people to be really creative and bring their colleagues along with them? That's a challenge. I don't suppose, I know Patrick Lencioni's doing he's just launched a new system. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's helping you to identify, there are 6 characteristics that we all, that we need to, that organizations or people, humans, display. And we're good at 2 of them, terrible at 2 of them, and sort of like, meh about the other 2. But if you're going to get a project done, then you're going to need to have these characteristics across the whole team somehow. And you go from the innovator, the inventor, if you like, to the right through to the closer, the person who likes to get things done and make them happen. So once you identify I think it's called My Genius or something like that. So once you've identified your type of genius, then you can say, yeah, that's what I do really, really well. And then you don't feel bad about the fact that actually, it's like me with Shine. It's been fantastic developing Shine. It's been brilliant taking it to the point where it's an MVP, but I'm not the person to take it out across the world and sell it across the world. That's somebody else would need different talents for that. And I know we're aware of that to some extent, but how we categorize it is another matter.
Just on Shine, Carolyn, what's the latest with it? What are your market plans and so on?
Well, thank you. Yeah, we've got markets across the world that are interested, which is fantastic. We're looking to work more closely with organizations that can help us to develop the insights for users, because that's going to be the thing that really gives it flight. And we've got some more field trials planned with Kyle's teams and a couple of other teams as well, to feed back into the process so that we can understand more and more about its impact and it's got so much potential, John. And with the resources we've got, we're limited to a certain area of collaboration. That's it. That's what we have to do. But we're looking for cornerstone clients at the moment who can come along and say, yes, we've got to, whether or not they might be, for example, looking at rolling out agility to their supplier networks, to their supply chain. Maybe they're already an agile organization themselves, but they want to encourage collaboration between their own teams and those out in the supply chain. But Shine would offer a great opportunity to do that.
Sounds really good. And where would people find out about Shine, Carolyn? What website would they go to and all that kind of stuff?
Well, very shortly they'll be able to go to shineverse.com. But for the moment, if they could look me up on LinkedIn, that would be great. Or just Carolyn Mumby on LinkedIn. Cool. But yeah, shineverse.com will, the actual platform's live, but we ironically haven't got the front end, the website live yet.
Yeah, no worries. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all, Kyle, Carolyn and Dave. Thank you very much. Lovely chatting with you today about agility as always. And maybe we can have another chat some other point about rewards, because we did touch on that today, but let's see how things go. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks, Carolyn and Dave as well.
If you would like your voice message to be featured on a future podcast episode, please leave a voice message at anchor.fm/xagility/message. That's anchor.fm/xagility/message. Thank you.